It's the summer of 2016, and that means it's time for the Rio Olympics. And that means our region's business is preempted for almost the entire month of August. However, our region's business can't take a hiatus in Rio. Wish it could, but it can't. So each week we'll be posting fresh content here on our YouTube channel. Today we're digging a little deeper into the science of growth with Sean Ammirati, a Pittsburgh-based early-stage venture capitalist and an adjunct professor at Carnegie Mellon University. And welcome back. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so this really an outgrowth of the work you've been doing and the teaching you've been doing at Carnegie Mellon?
That's right. Yeah, so it's interesting. You know, one of the things I always tell my students in the first entrepreneurship course that I teach is that all feedback's a gift. And that also means all feedback from your students to the professor is a gift, right? And actually, the whole thing started because one of my students said to me, you know, this course was great, absolutely great, one of the best courses I took. And I was thinking, wow, this is
just what I want to hear. I'm a genius, right?
Keep going. Sure. Do not, more, right? And he goes, but it's also a total waste of time. And I was like, oh, well, that was. So tell me more. Like, why was it? Remind myself all feedback's a gift. And he said, look, for a variety of reasons, I'm not going to leave Carnegie Mellon and go start a company. I would love to, but that's not what I'm going to do. Student debt, visa issues, lots of us in the class have these constraints. But what we are going to do is, instead of going to work for Google, we'd like to go join, a Jazz or an identified
already
technology.
established company. It's out there, it's early stage,
right.
But it's got to grow, right?
They've raised some money, single-digit millions of dollars, and the next challenge is how do you scale up and actually become a meaningful company? And he said, your course was great, but it really was idea to that point, not that point to a large company. And so the first course I taught was really based on Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup. And so I started looking for the equivalent of Lean Startup for that next phase. Couldn't find it. And
so you were really looking at how do you get that original idea and get it ready to go and turn it into a business. But that's not the same as growing that business into something big and great.
That's right. Yeah. That's exactly right. And so what ended up happening is I couldn't find the book. So I started taking the best students from that first course and asking them to build case studies where we looked at pairs of companies where one took off and one didn't. So Facebook versus Friendster, Tesla versus Fisker, McDonald's versus White Castle. And what you end up seeing is that there are these common patterns that companies go through when they go through these three phases of growth, and things you can do at each phase to increase the chance of being the Facebook, not the Friendster.
Well, let's talk about the pairs, and the two that really intrigued me in the book, although all the stories are fascinating, but Friendster, Facebook, and especially McDonald's and White Castle. So I want to make sure we hit on both of them. But I remember Friendster. I remember there was buzz about it in the beginning, and somehow Facebook just left them in the dust.
That's right. That's right. So it's interesting. Facebook and Friendster is a more typical case out of the 10. As you would expect, these cases being done at CMU, and the students picking them, they tend to pick high-tech, high-growth companies. Sure. But McDonald's White Castle was kind of the outlier. But it was an interesting, fun one to compare against the others, right? So looking at Facebook versus Friendster, it's worth pointing out that Friendster was earlier, right? It was a much
so they had a head start. They were the first mover.
They were the first mover, right? They had top-tier VCs. So to the argument that you often hear in the region that you get the right investors in and everything else falls into place.
It takes us money and the right advice.
I wish that were the case. But I think Facebook did an amazing job focusing on the right things at the right point. So the Friendster board would have conversations about how could they go into different languages? How could they monetize the site when the site wouldn't even stay up? And as you point out from the quote that everybody remembers from The Social Network, right? They were at Facebook. They were obsessed about really solving a real problem for their customers and creating a great interaction, and then slowly rolling that out to larger and larger groups of people.
The site will never go down. That was like that was the mantra. Incredible focus and mantra, and sticking to that focus, and not trying to do the whole world all at once. Right?
I mean, so they started with just a small handful of universities and rolled it out. There's actually a fascinating story that people in Pittsburgh will find interesting with the Penn State connection. So the way they picked schools is people were on sign-up lists, and they would look at the university domains, and they would add those schools. Well, the first Big Ten school they added was Penn State. And up till that point, it had been Harvard and Stanford and
all the Ivies,
right?
Suspects, sure.
Yeah, and as Penn State alum, my partner Ned Renzi, likes to point out, there's a lot more people who go to these Big Ten schools, right? And so the first day they turned Penn State on, they were like, what the heck is going on here? They had never seen so many people come into the site, and it was because like they had now increased this concentric circle where it was a much larger universe of potential customers than they'd ever been exposed to before. But they just did an amazing job at that. And then when the important things change to think about monetization or whatever, they made conscious choices to stay focused on those issues at that point in time. And so I think they did a really good job on a number of things, focusing on the right things at the front end. And then the other thing I would give them a lot of credit for is they were incredibly disciplined. Right? One of the things that we suspected turned out to not be validated by the research we did was that when you're in that rapid growth stage, so past the prerequisites, past the catalyzing events, but the sustainable long-term growth, we expected that the companies that won would do more things, right? They would have more things going on. It actually turns out that what we saw over and over again was there's this mantra inside those companies to just focus on doing the right things. Peter Thiel, who was the CEO of PayPal, would literally talk to his direct reports only about one thing. He would say, what's the number one thing you're working on at this point? And that's the only thing I want to hear about. When
Concentric circles, and then step by step in the way you approach your growth. Got to ask you before we run out of time, though, about McDonald's and White Castle, which is here in this book with all these tech companies.
Yeah, so it's funny. So one of the students actually proposed, hey, could I do McDonald's versus White Castle? I thought, that's interesting. See if the patterns, hold up, almost a century earlier, right? And similar to Facebook Friendster, White Castle was started like 30 years before McDonald's.
I didn't realize that. Wow. So they really invented the concept of fast hamburger food?
They did. Wow. They did. But did a number of things that sort of constrained their growth. And obviously it's still a going concern today. There are hundreds of White Castles across the country. But if you were to compare White Castle to the billions and billions of hamburgers served, completely different. One of the things I think that's fascinating, and this does speak to, at the right point, financing your growth is important, is at the time of McDonald's versus White Castle, there weren't people like myself. There was nobody with the job profession of venture capitalist. But McDonald's realized that they needed to grow faster than organic cash flow could provide. And so they did something really smart, which was they basically financed the real estate that the businesses were built on top of, and allowed them to create a lot more leverage in the business and ultimately grow much faster and create this sort of vibrant network of restaurants across the country.
And then at that point just opened the lead, and they were able to maintain the business. Well, fascinating stuff. That's just one of the, two, I guess, of the pairs and two of the stories in the book, The Science of Growth. Great advice for entrepreneurs looking to figure out how to take it to the next level.
That's right. Thank you.
Sean Ammirati, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Well, enjoy what's left of the summer, and of course, enjoy the Olympics on WPXI TV. For the staff of our region's business and for the Allegheny Conference, I'm Bill Flanagan. See you back on the air on Sunday, August 3rd.